Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Fair, and I'm the Executive Director for Pedigree Foundation. I'm so glad you guys could join us today for a conversation on Traveling Tales, our transport toolkit, which is very new. I want you to know that for us at Pedigree Foundation, transport is one of our key strategic giving pillars, and it's something that's very important to us. We consider it a big part of our giving strategy as it is a life-saving program that you can all do. So the conversation today is going to be, how do you start one? What are the things that you need to consider? What, if you have a transport program, are there things that you could do to help enhance it? So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Hassen, who's with Outcomes for Pets. We've got a great group here that can talk to you about from destination to receiving and also from a national scope. So Kristen, take over.
Great. Thank you so much, Deb and Meg, and thanks to Pedigree Foundation. I think for the last 2 years in the work I've been getting to do with Pedigree Foundation, they are most interested in going right to the heart of the biggest unsolvable challenges, which is super brave and really important. There's a number of toolkits you can find. We're going to share links to those, but there's a number of toolkits you can find that can help you with some of your outstanding problems. We expect a lot of people to be watching this webinar after it airs, so this will be recorded and there will be a link, and we'll plan to put it up online. I'm going to have each guest introduce themselves the first time that they start talking, but we're here to talk about transport programs, and I think transport to me is the biggest heartbreak of the pandemic, up there with the loss of volunteer support in shelters. And I say that because we know there is data to show that we've seen a decline in transport. And pet transport, working in Texas, working with lots of rural impoverished communities, like those animals are truly counting on that lifeline. They don't have a chance at life without transport. And so we have true national experts here with us today to talk a little bit about kind of where we're at with transport, but also how to get started if you are just starting, how to expand your program. And I'm going to ask some of the questions that I think we take for granted sometimes, but I think a lot of us don't know the answers to. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here with us. I'm going to start with you, Karen. And again, if every speaker could talk just a little bit about themselves on the first question, but Karen, can you talk a little bit about the current state of transport and what you've seen happen like since the pandemic?
Sure. I'm Karen Walsh. I'm the Senior Director of Animal Relocation at the ASPCA. We transport about 27,000 animals a year by ground and by air. And I think that the pandemic was sort of a view into the future for all of us. It was a time where supply and demand had matched in such a way that we were able to move animals to destinations that we would not have been able to move before the pandemic. There were more resources available. There were people at home that had time to give to a pet. There were short length of stays when they went to the destination. And so all good things that were happening for transport during the pandemic were largely that supply and demand piece that I think that we'll eventually get back to. But what happened after that was people went back to work and things changed, and length of stay for animals that were in the shelter became longer. When animals at the destination end are stuck in the shelter for a longer period of time, that means you can't move more up there to replace them and become adopted. So it kind of created a logjam. There are still animals moving. There's still people doing it very successfully, just not in the same ease and numbers that they were doing it before. And so I think that I don't want to sound not hopeful, because I do think that there's hope. I do think transport's the answer to a lot of the questions. It's just that right now we're in a period where things are shifting continuously, and we're watching what's happening and moving towards wherever animals can be transported at the moment.
I'm going to turn now to Claire. Claire, you oversee the sending of animals to safe locations around the country. Can you talk a little bit about what you see kind of the current struggle is with getting highly adoptable pets out of under-resourced shelters into communities where there is an availability of adopters?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm so happy to see this toolkit come out in this webinar, because I think transport has historically been very hard to navigate, not only with understanding all the different state rules and requirements, but the obligations and the workload that goes on the source shelter, it's very troublesome because it's oftentimes the sending shelter's responsibility to handle all the logistics, but they're the ones that tend to be under-resourced, tend to be the ones drowning, and tons of dogs and cats that need the transport support. So I think navigating state requirements, understanding how to find the actual transport to get there. For many organizations, it's also hard to get all the vetting done that's required. And then I think the biggest thing that I hear from source partners is that one of the biggest struggles is finding who to send to. How do you navigate that? How do you find partners? So I'm excited to cover some of that today, and then also that it's covered in the toolkit.
Thank you so much. Mirah and Claire, can you tell us a little bit about what you do? Because I think your work is really says a lot about your experience in this area.
Sure. Yeah, I never set out with an interest to start transporting. It was out of necessity. I started working at San Antonio Animal Care Services about 15 years ago, and at that time, about 20,000 pets were being euthanized every year, and I had no idea what I was walking into. Transport for me started with a single contact. Inconveniently in one of the farthest parts of the country in the Pacific Northwest, just a partner that said she could take 10 dogs. And then it just sort of ballooned from there in terms of being able to extend a network. And really, I have a passion of understanding all the nitty gritty with partnerships and what makes them run well. And one of the things that I feel is really important is that transport partnerships are really equitable in nature, that it's not what I just alluded to, that the burden of the transport and the life-saving work is all on the source shelter without a receiving partner contributing to that. So I've seen it go very well or go well in a lot of different cases. And so I'm trying to capture those lessons from really good partnerships and strong partnerships and help others mimic the same. We've developed at Austin Pets Alive a transport hub for several Texas shelters that don't have the means to transport directly to receiving partners in different parts of the state. We bring them all to a central location, help with the vetting, and then physically coordinate all the logistics to getting them home. So we send about just under 3,000 animals out a year with a goal of getting up to 4,000 in 2025.
Thanks, Claire. It's amazing. Mirah, when we were meeting yesterday, you brought up this thing that I think was, you said it and I was like, oh yeah, of course we have to talk about this, is I want to start transport and I have no money, no vehicle, no vet. Can you talk about how we think about transport for organizations that really feel like, how would we even begin given how overwhelmed we are and how little resources we have?
Sure. And so just a little bit of background about me. I started Lucky Dog Animal Rescue 15 years ago. We now have 2 locations. Our originating location is in Northern Virginia. And we in Northern Virginia are 100% foster-based organization that transports in between 2,800 and 3,000 animals a year. We also last year opened a rescue campus in South Carolina, where we are bringing animals from under-resourced shelters and preparing them for transport and then sending them out. So the question of how to start, especially when you don't have all of those elements, is incredibly daunting for many. And I think the most important thing that started our transport journey at Lucky Dog is finding 1 or 2 key partners that you really trust. And building a relationship with them and solving those problems together. So one of the very first partners that Lucky Dog started working with was a shelter in Pickens County, South Carolina. And they had pretty much no interest in providing veterinary care back 15 years ago. A lot of things have changed since then. But we had 1 or 2 volunteers that were trying to make a difference for the animals in that county. They needed a receiving outlet. I was able to provide the funds that they needed to get the animals vetted. And we would take 10 or 12 dogs out at a time. And so that partnership laid the groundwork for them being able to get their county on board with transport. So I think the most important thing for figuring out how to start is to take that one small step and not expect your first transport to be a 50 animal transport. But as Claire noted, her first transport was 10 dogs. And that's how you start, with those little baby steps with someone that you find out there that you can trust.
Great, thank you. Karen, I wonder, how are you navigating in a moment where, I work with a lot of big shelters who need to transport, and when I see the communications, it's often like, oh yeah, we can take 10 small dogs, and then that gets whittled down to like 5 small dogs, and like no big dogs, and none of this, and you get this list that gets rolled out. So I'll have a system with 1,000 animals in it, and like only 25 are eligible. How do we need to think about that? Because I think it's really demoralizing for orgs, like thinking about sending, like, oh, nobody actually wants the animals we need help with. How do you think about that and kind of deal with that?
I think we really try to live where we are at the moment. And like before, we always had a full truck, and we always at the A, like we weren't moving unless we had a full truck, and we had a variety pack, we called it, inside the truck. So there had to be so many large dogs and so many mediums and so many smalls or puppies, so that it was that equitable, fair transport. But the challenge with that right now is, let's say there was a destination that's willing to take 5 large dogs on that transport, but they know the length of stay for those 5 large dogs could be 6 weeks, 2 months at their shelter. That transport that they just took helped those 5 dogs, helped that source shelter move 5 dogs, but it may have tied up the next 20 that they want to send, because those kennels stay full and they can't move the next group of animals that they have. So I think it's really important for sources and for destinations to look at what number they can take, and then try really hard to offer resources in other ways as well. So a lot of destinations are working with sources on adoption programs and how they can expand their local adoption, how they can market animals, those sorts of things, as well as some of them do funds to give back, or they may buy some type of product for the shelter, food, something to help them and do that give back for them. But it's hard to recommend taking animals that the destination can't move either, because then transport stops altogether. But it is good to look at specific animals that are in the shelter and say, okay, this animal, with the resources that we have a foster for him. We can get him out there, and that way his longer length of stay won't impact the shelter as much, because he'll be in a foster home instead. So I think truly as a source, discussing with your destination what challenges you're seeing, what support that you need, without being unrealistic. What Mirah and Claire said is very true. Like, my transport may be 5 animals. And that would never have happened before. For us, it was always a full truck. But if 5 animals is all that destination can take, and that 5 animals is life-saving for that source and may free up an enormous amount of space for them if they're small, then we'll move those 5 animals to make sure that that happens. So, and what they were saying too about like animals that are going on a flight, when you're preparing 100 cats for a flight, what Claire said is absolutely true. People are there till 4 a.m. preparing that transport, getting all those animals labeled and ready to go. It's a huge life-saving transport, but it's also incredibly labor intensive for the source to do that. And so destinations should really take into account what that looks like at the source end as well.
Kristen, if I can jump in with one quick suggestion.
Yeah.
So one thing that we've really found some success in recently is it's very hard sometimes to guess as a receiving shelter what is going to resonate with your adoption base, right? Like, because it really is just a guess. So we've identified, working with our source shelters, we've identified 4 to 5 long stay animals that they have that they really want to get adopted. And we've posted them straight for adoption on our websites, and we've moved all of them. And that, if I had thought about would I have pulled that animal for foster, I probably wouldn't have, because I didn't think it was going to move that fast and I was worried about length of stay. But just this last 2 weeks ago, we brought in straight for adoption a dog that had been at Palm Valley for 2 years, and it's a very successful adoption. So thinking outside the box in some of those ways is also a great way to challenge your assumptions and help without tying up kennel space.
So you're getting adoption commitments and then transporting.
Correct.
I kind of think that's like got to be in the future of how we think about this, right? Do you guys, is anyone else doing that? And I know the criticism is going to be, but they don't know the animals and they haven't met them. Can you, any of you talk? And this next series of questions are for anyone who wants to respond. Just if someone's already said what you said, you can just thumbs up, but there are things that you may all want to weigh in. So is there any thoughts on how we would message that or explain that to, how does that work?
So we actually incentivize our adopters to do that. So we call it a 2-week trial adoption. And we basically tell them it's a 2-week money back guarantee. You get to try the animal out in your home for 2 weeks. And if it doesn't work out, you just return it to us and we'll give you a refund. By the way, we don't give refunds in any other situation. So that's an important distinction. We also tell them that they're not saving 1 life, but they're saving 3 lives. They're saving the animal they're taking into the home. They're skipping us needing to give a foster, put that animal into foster care, and they're opening a kennel as well. So it's a threesome, 3-4 for one animal. And we, again, have relationships with source partners that we really trust. And so they help us write the bio. They give us great content, video, photos. And so, yes, it is a little bit more work on them. But if it's a long stay dog that they've had for 6, 7, 8 months, they largely have that content anyway. And so that's how we've worked those out. And they've gone really well.
Great. Claire, do you have anything to share about that?
Sure. We're looking to pilot this year with one of our longstanding partners. We're looking to pilot a direct to adopt program where we would be doing the same, because they usually can only take, even though it's greatly helpful, the 10 to 12 a month from us. But we know that we've got a long list, 200 plus of dogs that would easily fit into homes and easily qualify for transport. So as a way to try to expand that, they're going to do a similar thing where they're going to be marketing them directly to adopters. And then if it doesn't work out, they're going to be our safety net. So we're going to look to pilot that probably starting in February of this year. So instead of just sending 10 to 12 a month, maybe we can move that to closer to 20 and go directly to the adopters, because we know that we have such incredible dogs and cats that are just being lost. And for many shelters we're working with, they're not even viewable on a website. So we're trying to get that information of who they are, get their photos, get their bios in a way and show them off to the world, because we know that there's adopters out there. It's just we're missing that visibility piece. So more to come on that soon.
Great. That's super. That's really helpful. I'm going to take a moment just to share my screen. If you don't know what the toolkit is, there is a link to it. We'll reshare that also. But these toolkits are written for frontline staff. We felt like it was really important. Nope, not that. We felt like it was really important to appeal to shelter workers. There is very little training. There's no standardization in animal welfare. None might be an exaggeration, but not much of one. And so because we lack that, and we've had this massive turnover in the field, we have a lot of loss of institutional knowledge. People just don't know what to do or how to fix things. So this toolkit was written really to help frontline workers. There's Claire doing a transport. And it starts at the very beginning, which is how do you even know you need to do transport? We get into kind of the specifics of various scenarios for transport. We talk about the programs that support transport, and then we talk about actually how you find partners. So this toolkit really is about, it is a getting started or growing toolkit. It is impossible. When we started writing this, it could have been a book. But we get into how to build relationships. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to just make sure that you all know that this is all in the toolkit, everything you're hearing today, and we'll continue to share this. So we really do recommend sharing this toolkit, and not just sharing it, but talking to your staff about it, talking to your volunteers about it, having it be part of the discussion. These are meant to be learning tools, so they're not just meant to be read, they're meant to be discussed. So this is it's a great starting point for any org wanting to start or expand a program. Can you all talk a little bit about how you how do you know a community needs to transport? And Karen, maybe we should kick this one off with you. How do you know a community needs to transport versus just doing a better job at adoption, foster, rescue? Like, is there a formula for that?
I don't know if there's a formula, but it's when we do our application process, we're asking people questions like that. Like when I have a conversation with somebody and they say, well, we want to transport because we don't trust anybody in our community to adopt. That type of attitude is not only going to hurt them in adopting animals, but it's also going to make it impossible for them to fundraise or become a part of their community. You have to learn to work with people where they are in your community and open that door to trust. We look at the data for what their animals are that are in their care. If your whole population looks the same and there's no variety anymore, transport's hard, because if everything that you have is a large dog and large dogs aren't moving right now, we might be able to move one, but we couldn't move any significant number. So we encourage people to partner locally with each other. Sometimes there might be a shelter just down the road or 3 rescues that you work with that are pulling everything from your shelter that helps you place the ones that are in your care. So we really encourage people to keep variety in their population so that the public are encouraged to come in. And then also to work locally with people that are in your community to showcase your animals, to bring them out, to help them get adopted in a variety of ways, different programs that are available. Transport's not for everyone. And one of the things that we mentioned earlier that Claire and Mirah were talking about is that preparation piece. Is if you don't have a vet and you don't have a truck and you don't have the money, what do you do? And there is a preparation piece that needs to happen so that you are sure that when you're offered the resource that you can actually utilize it. So if you have somebody that says, hey, we'll spay or neuter 10 animals in your community for you, and we'll do that every week, and you bring them 2 or you bring them 3, you aren't able to bring them the number, then you're taking that resource away from someone else. So when you accept a resource that you're offered, it's really important that you utilize it to its full extent so that everyone benefits from what is in your community already. And then we also encourage that work in concentric circles so that you're starting as close to home as you can go. Then maybe you don't need health certificates, and then you work going out of state and farther.
Right. And Mirah, how do you know when an org approaches you? I mean, you all are doing so much work, but you're having to make hard choices every day. How do you know, like, are you going for the small orgs that need a little help? Or are you going for the big orgs that truly rely on you for, you know, generally like pretty big numbers of animals?
Yeah, I think for us, it's really a mix. So one of the biggest changes for us since the pandemic is even before the pandemic, I never had to say no. I really didn't. I could say yes to almost everyone. In fact, that's how I met Claire the first time when she was at SAPA. We took a transport from Texas. But it's really changed since then. So what I look for in trying to onboard new partners are exactly what Karen was alluding to. Not necessarily do they have the resources, but do they have the commitment if I provide the resources? So if I'm going to say, sure, you know, you're 3 counties over from our rescue campus in South Carolina, I can fit in these animals, but I need you to bring them to me. I need you to actually show up with the animals. They need to be as advertised, and have that trusting relationship. So I think when I'm looking to onboard new partners, I'm looking for someone, A, do I feel like the information I'm getting from them is accurate? And B, are they going to kind of do what they say? And those are not, I mean, they seem like really straightforward requirements, but candidly, they're not always. And so that's something that I really look for. I also I try not to focus on shelters that have a lot of support already. So if they have pretty high local adoptions, or if they already have like 7 other organizations coming in to help them. And so when they send me their list of animals in need, by the time I respond 3 hours later, all the animals are covered, then that's maybe not a shelter that I need to be putting my effort into. I'm going to look for the next one that really seems to need help.
Right. And how do we think about, this is kind of a, I don't know the answer to this, but like, how do we think about like heartworm dogs in this moment? Like an animal that is more challenging, that is going to require more resources. Like, how are you balancing sort of like totally wonderful heartworm positive dogs that need help with knowing that with the same number of resources, you could probably save more not medically compromised animals?
So we're probably the wrong group to ask right now because we are running a heartworm study program, and we have committed to treating 200 heartworm dogs through our program in the next, I think we have another year, 6 months to a year to do. But even before we were doing that, we always said yes or no, regardless of heartworm status. What we're trying to prove in this study, I hope, will make everyone really open to heartworm dogs. But hopefully by the end of the study, we will be able to show that an animal can enter the shelter, get altered, and be through heartworm treatment, not exercise restriction, but through treatment within 2 weeks. And then be ready to go out the shelter doors. And so hopefully it won't be such a drain on resources.
Wow. Claire, how about you? You're the one, when I worked with APA, just seeing the massive number of plea lists, how are you working through those lists and making decisions? You're kind of the middle agency for a lot of those groups.
Yeah, for sure. I think the important piece of that, and Karen said it right with the variety, I think that's key. I try to steer away from any sort of blanket policy, things like we never take this, or this, we never can consider X, Y, or Z, and just truly treating dogs and cats as individuals, and giving our partners a win. I think because I am in the middle, so I see sort of the receiving side, but mostly the sending side. But I know how important it is and what that means to a source partner when a receiving shelter says, send us, like, show us some of your longest stays. Who are you advocating for the most? Like, who are some of your favorite dogs that you feel are getting overlooked? Or which cat do you wish you could send us? And maybe you can't help with that whole list of 15, 20 plus, but can you help with 1 or 2 each transport? I mean, that just like morale alone, what that does for a partnership is just, it's truly amazing. And I can't say it enough, like how much that means to a partnership, that a receiving partner is looking out for that. And that it just helps everybody on the source side to give them hope, to make them like rally around. It's sort of like momentum in sports. It's like, I just finished watching the World Series, but it's like somebody hits like that one home run and it just spurs that team to just, it initiates a winning streak there. And it's the same. It's like getting that one win under your belt, that one dog that's been there for a while, or that cat with medical conditions can just do so much for that positive momentum moving forward. So I try to stay away from any absolutes and just really look at case by case in terms of what we can send on transport. And every partner is different. One more thing I'll add is receiving partners all have their different strengths and sort of interests depending on who you're talking to. We have some partners in the Pacific Northwest that love those active dogs that can do like 5 to 10 mile hikes at a time and not so much the couch potatoes. And then we have other partners that have, like lots of city life where they need to be like, okay, walking down busy city streets and things. So understanding that not everybody wants a small little lap dog, that some people do want that messy, muddy, large, 80, 70 pound dog to go hiking with on the weekend, and really playing to those strengths. We try never to just mass plea a list, BCCing everybody on it. We try to really hone in like, hey, so-and-so, Mirah, I've got 5 dogs that have your name on it. I know these are right up your alley, and really personalize that outreach. We know that she's definitely more willing to say yes because we put thought into it.
I would like to take a rant break because I get really frustrated with organizations sending long lists of A numbers, random animals, and they're sending them to me asking me for help. And I'll say like, hey, can you give me a list of like 20 animals that like you think would like get people's attention? And they seem completely incapable of doing this. And I don't know why we're not getting that we need to tell a story. Karen, can you tell, I mean, if I have a rant about it, you must have like real heartburn about this happening. How do you recommend, like, how do you get it through to people that we have to like, actually, they can't just be lines on a page. They have to be more than that if we're trying to get them help.
With what Claire said about selecting those couple that are the ones that you really, really as an organization want to move, we encourage people to make videos. Anybody with a cell phone can make a video of that dog with other dogs, with the staff saying all the wonderful things about him. Those things will allow a video to go every time. And sometimes people don't take advantage of it. They don't make one, but other times people regularly make a video. And more often than not, if they can take those animals, they do. I've discussed your same rant with people about you're trying to encourage people to want a particular animal. You're not trying to showcase how challenging life is for you or how there's this huge list, because it becomes overwhelming and people flip the page and just say, I can't. Or right now, because there's so many people asking for help, there's so many animals out there that need help, you have to be caught up by the one that touches you. You can't focus on the huge numbers of that come in those pleas. And honestly, the way those pleas are often written, they are a big turnoff. They're almost threatening in how they come across. And I've had a lot of shelters say that they delete those, they don't even open them, they just delete them. And so you're wasting a lot of time creating those types of lists when you could make a video, talk about a specific animal, talk about something that your shelter's doing in your community to try to help, and just ask for that one. And that's how you could build that relationship. When people at a destination fall in love with that one, your story, then maybe next time it would be 2 or 5 or 10, you never know. But those plea lists I don't find as effective.
I want to piggyback on what Karen said, because with our transport program into Northern Virginia, we are 100% foster based. And so I can only pull what I can put directly into foster off the van. And the personalized behavior notes, even just a few lines of how they are in playgroup or how they are when they meet the staff, or a staff favorite note or a video, a better picture is hugely important. And so it's not just even about getting them into the receiving partners, but you can expand the number of receiving partners that you potentially could have and tap into those foster-based networks if there's more information coming with the animals. So I think videos are gold.
Yeah, that's really good to know. So I had this thing happen. I was working with the shelter that was kind of traumatizing. Actually, Karen was trying to help me with the shelter too. And they had all these puppies and moms dying. And it was really sad. Like I just was like, I have to do something. And I started calling family members in Ohio who connected me with rescues, connected me with shelters. And everyone was like, yeah, we can take a few. Yeah, we can take a few. Everyone's saying yes, right? And then I get totally stuck and I'm like, well, I have no idea how to get them to you. And you're not all in the same place. So you're like, some of you are in Northern Ohio, some of you are in our south. Given that we're having to transport smaller numbers of the animals, how do you all kind of do that part where you know you're going to have to move a group of animals, but they're going to have to go different places and the logistics can get tricky?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that from sort of just if you don't have a connection with a larger group, like say the ASPCA or Wings of Rescue or some of the larger groups that are doing the flights. I think every state probably has one. Texas has a pretty extensive one, and it is moderated, but a Facebook group, if you just type in your state and then transport, the one in Texas is just a closed Facebook group, but there's lots of people on it. It's very active, called Texas Transports. It's a way to rally like a relay, like to build a relay of drivers. So that's one way that people are doing it and are able to connect. Pilots and Paws, we've successfully done quite a few flights when we have, either a small group of cats in smaller cat carriers or a couple of dogs. These are volunteer pilots that are on, it's a very active thread called Pilots and Paws, where you can post your need. We've been able to fly dogs and cats across states with different pilots. Sometimes we've had 2 pilots that do relays, and that's been a really great way to work with smaller animals. Dubert also has a way that you can post your needs. Just last week, I was able to find a driver from, even though I'm in Texas, but the cities are quite a few hours away from each other. So from Houston to Austin, we were able to find a transporter on Dubert that was able to do that in just a couple days' notice. So I would also, if you're a municipal shelter, connect with local rescues around you. We work with a lot of shelters via rescues that are doing the nonprofits that are doing the work on behalf of the shelter, and their network is pretty extensive, what they've built. So I don't think everybody needs to be doing this on their own. It's more networking and connecting with other groups that are doing this. And if you find a rescue that this is their thing, this is what they're doing, try to tap into that and say, hey, can I throw 3 dogs on this upcoming transport? I would get to know them first before you just send dogs on random transports. But that's been a great way. So a municipal shelter doesn't necessarily, or a smaller rescue, need to feel like they've got to purchase a van or do all of it. It's more about networking and getting help from others.
There are also some fairly reasonable, though not completely cheap, organizations, nonprofit organizations like Pink Happy Tails, and a couple others that do transport that you can basically pay for them for crate space. The other organization that's really cool to work with is SWAT with Southwest Airlines. So that is a group of flight attendants who essentially pick up non-revenue seats whenever they're available. They can take anything that fits in cabin. You pay for the fee. It's $125. But we've moved animals out of Puerto Rico regularly. We've moved animals from Texas to Virginia pretty regularly. And the super cool thing about it is that you also gain credit through their Tickets for Time program. So we have earned, I think so far, 8 round trip tickets on Southwest Airlines for staff to attend conferences and things like that. So there's multiple great things through the Southwest Airlines group.
Great, thank you. Okay, so if you are, one of the things I think working primarily with funding shelters, I wonder about is Mirah, I think you're an exception to some of the challenges I think with receiving partners, and I totally get them, right? Like they're assuming risk. They absolutely do not have an obligation to assume. But it's also really hard when you're broke and you're sending animals out. How do you think receiving partners can be good partners? Like, what should we expect? Because I feel like when I'm calling a receiving shelter, I'm like begging them. I'm like, I'll pay you, should we have a relationship where we're expecting something out of those shelters that are the destination shelters that are taking the animals? And like, how do we even talk about that? Because I would feel really awkward.
I think there's an obligation sorry, Mirah, I think there's an obligation at the destination end to manage your population too, and manage your local community's population before you reach out and take animals from elsewhere. And a lot of them plan out their transports over a year so that they know what they're taking in and when they're taking it in, so they can continue to manage their local population too. So the large receiving shelters that get calls all the time about this have a really hard time saying no or saying yes sometimes, because they already have such an extensive plan. So I think it goes back to what we were just saying about, like, it's a specific animal, it's a specific relationship. They can often be built at conferences and places like that where you're actually sitting down and talking to somebody. And you have to remember that maybe you're the 10th call that day from somebody that wants help, and they want to help you, but their world has changed too. We have a lot of shelters that were in the program, our program, for years, that now don't take transport at all as a part of their shelter operation because they can't, because their local community has changed so tremendously. So I think it's understanding what's happening at both ends. And just because you're in New Hampshire or Maine or one of those places doesn't mean you can necessarily be a receiving shelter anymore, even if you were in the past.
And I want to jump in and say that even as a receiving partner, I'm a strong advocate for giving back to the source. And I think that it's not fair for me to be able to collect a fairly large adoption fee on an animal that I need to have vetted before it even arrives, especially when I'm taking from an under-resourced shelter that is really struggling to get by. So whether it is I'm going to absorb all of the transport costs because we're putting it on a van that costs $200 per crate, or whether I'm going to reimburse for veterinary expenses. I try to make a policy of never sending a transport van back empty as long as they're going back to where they came from. So we always put a bunch of donations, food donations. Even when we worked with Claire and we were sending things back to SAPA, we filled her van with things. So it doesn't always have to be money if it's not something that you have to spare. It could be like you do a in-kind donation drive and you send a bunch of food back to the shelter, but something so that there really is a symbiotic relationship. I think that should be the norm, and it really hurts those organizations that are trying to ask, if you're a source shelter, ask for support from receiving shelters so that you can get by, to have the receiving shelter be, well, you know what, I can get free animals from the next county over, so I'm just going to take from them.
Right. Yeah, that's really helpful. I think that, so if I'm an org, can you guys walk me through, like, I'm an organization, I have a population of animals that I know are highly adoptable elsewhere. I know we're struggling. I know we're already doing adoption and foster and volunteer programs, and we're still struggling to get those animals out. Where do I start? Like, do I just start cold calling people? Is that how you do it? You just start looking up organizations and making calls? Like, what is the way to get started if you've never done this, but you know you need to move animals?
One thing I'd recommend is, and Chris Roy, who founded Dubert, taught me this, and I thought it was really insightful. But and I definitely didn't take the advice before I met him, because I was transporting all the way from San Antonio to Portland, but trying not to go for the farthest destination from you. So he had talked about drawing circles, like a radius around you of, say 100 miles, and looking at groups within there. And if there isn't any that can receive, draw that out a further diameter, draw a bigger circle, and just keep widening your network, but not, or your outreach, but not going for like Miami to Seattle, for instance, because we know the cost, the stress, all the logistics of that is really, really challenging. I see a lot of groups that get like a random contact, like I did, and so don't do what I did, but find a random contact, say in like the tippy top of Maine, or go all the way in Canada, and they're chasing that as, and maybe you could start there, but I would definitely recommend looking closer to you, closer to home, to try to decrease that distance. We don't have a great network, like you had said, Kristen. Their social media, I've done some like unofficial polling of partners, like how did they find each other, like those that are transporting, and the number one reason that keeps coming up is they found each other through social media. So there are those closed groups. Best Friends has one. We have the Haas Shelter and Rescue Support Group, pretty big networks where there's conversations happening. Maddie's Pet Forum is another one, where people in animal welfare are connecting with each other. You don't have to create a unique post. If you keyword search transport, there's several threads that come up from that. And then, so I think social media is a big one. Karen mentioned conferences, networking, attending webinars like this, and any sort of classes. There's a lot of online classes now, and like, chatting on the side and getting to know each other. I have found partners, even if I just have one contact in an area, like I had one contact in the Midwest, and even though she can only take 5 dogs, I asked her who she would recommend. And I've done that the same thing in the Pacific Northwest, and have found 5 to 10 more partners just with that recommendation. And then one last thing I'll add to that is, from the source perspective, really advertising what you can provide. It is very nerve-wracking for the receiving side of getting disease, or getting, parvo or anything, getting unknown behavior issues. So I have even seen partners attach their SOPs as like part of their onboarding, to say, this is a little bit about what we can provide. This is our vaccine on intake policy. This is how we run play groups. Like, if you have all of those in place, if you're doing those things, I would brag about that, shout it from the rooftop, and show how great of an organization you are, and people will want to work with you if they have that reassurance. That's a lot of information.
I totally love that. And it makes me think we need to do like a, when you're trying to rent with a pet, you can do like a rental, like a profile of your pets. We need to do something like that for organizations. It's a really good idea. And I haven't seen it done very often, of like, here's who we are, here's what we do. Maybe that's a template we can create if it hasn't already been created. Do you think that when we get into these relationships, I know it gets real grumpy real fast, like where expectations, like I know you can talk about it. And then, for I worked in Fairfax. If we had gotten distemper, we would have lost it. Like, we would have totally freaked out. One time we had a distemper animal, and we took it outside and euthanized it, and everybody's wearing plastic, and we thought we were all going to get it like it was rabies. There are different cultural understandings of what is okay, what isn't, and like what we do. How do you bridge that? Like, do we need a system? And I think this is a question actually that's not just pie in the sky, but like, do we need to start thinking about getting people to each other's organizations as kind of fundamental to how we do this?
So Kristen, and I want to answer that question, but I want to say one other thing to Claire's point about onboarding shelter partners is once you've reached out to a receiving shelter and you've given them your pitch and all that, don't then give them a 6-page application to become a receiving partner, because that, I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me. And I've been like, I'll give you my 501, I'll give you something reasonable, but I'm not doing a 6-page application to help you with something that you asked for. So I think that it needs to be kind of thoughtful on both ends. And so Kristen, I love the idea. So we actually bring volunteers to all of our source shelters. Once we have a relationship with them that goes on for more than a year, we take our staff and we take our volunteers to visit the shelters, because it is really important to see the culture, to see what the animals are coming from, and to understand how hard for us, we have to understand how hard the source shelter is working, and why some of the questions, especially that our volunteers are asking us to find out about these animals before they arrive, are kind of not fair to be asking, or, you know, we have to have some grace with what we're asking. So I think it would be amazing if there was more ways for line staff to be able to do those types of exchanges. Right now, it's, you know, on us to fund for staff and volunteers to fund for themselves. But it really is, I think, immeasurably valuable just to see how other people do things and to get some understanding. And it really, from the volunteer perspective, energizes them a lot.
I'll add to that. At the A, we started a program where we do that with our destination shelters. Anybody that's a staff member can be nominated to come forward, and then our own staff from across the organization can do this too, and either be a co-driver on a transport and go out there and meet the source, drive, stay overnight, go to the destination shelter, do all those things. And then we also have a courier program on our flights. So if you're part of the destination and you get a flight every weekend, then you get to go and see the 100 animals getting prepared before the flight and the work that the source goes through. And if they're doing that on a weekly basis, that every weekend that's happening at the source. And I think it's very eye-opening for people, the type of work that the volunteers there are doing in order to be sure that they can get the animals out. And it does help build those bonds between sources and destinations too. But the other point to that is what we were saying about sending disease and those kinds of things. You've got to respect the laws that exist in the state that your destination has to abide by, or transport can get shut down altogether. And I think that we've had several examples this year of states changing their laws and making things more complex for transport because of incidents that happened. And so my soapbox is always, it's really, really important to be sure that you know what you're transporting and that it's medically and appropriate for that state as well as for transport in general.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and I think on that note, I don't want to spend too long on this, but I think behavior is another area where I really struggle, because like our animals in rural communities in the South, many of them are used to free roaming. They're very social with other animals, but you put them behind a cage and they're like totally freaked out. I think just saying behavior is kind of a problem, because behavior is just a huge span, but how do we make sure that we're understanding what receiving partners can and can't handle when it comes to behavior? Like, are those just conversations that you have?
I think there are conversations, and there's also a bit of trial and error, honestly, because we have started to learn that, you know, the dogs that we get from rural Texas and try to be in Washington, D.C. in an apartment building, sometimes they do have a little bit of a learning curve. So what we've started asking from those source shelters is, have you taken this dog to one of your PetSmart events, right? Like, has it been outside the shelter? I mean, starting to learn some of the questions. I think that you have to expect that there's going to be some behavioral surprises on every single transport that you get, because the dogs or cats even also are going to come in and be quite different. So the more information you can gather, the better. So because we're foster based, we really can't take any dogs that show dog aggression in the shelter, not cage reactivity, but actual dog aggression. And we still end up with dogs that end up with problems, right? And we know that, and we we factor that into our plan every year. And that's why we start off with the caveat that says, if you've seen actual aggression in the shelter, this is not a match for us, knowing that something might come up down the road.
Great. What is one place, if you want to learn like transport best practices, because this toolkit, it's really not about the nitty gritty of what goes on the tag and how many animals go in the kennel. Where should we look for like national best practices or any standards for how we're actually doing the operations of the transport?
I don't actually know of one, and maybe Claire or Karen does, but having worked with a number of different large national organizations on flights and ground transports, everyone does them differently, and everyone has a different nomenclature for their kennel sizes, which is very confusing to me. So maybe this is a project that Pedigree can help spearhead. But yeah, it's very different. And there are also, to Karen's earlier point, state regulations, there's USDA regulations, all of those things, and people have different ways of complying with them.
I was going to recommend Karen to answer that question, because I know you do a lot of work in best practices, and we work together on that too.
Yeah. I mean, I think ALA has an older best practice now, but still is a good best practice to start yourself out with. The ASV guidelines has extensive transport piece in it. ASPCA Pro, we're actually making videos for people so that they can learn, not just for something that's written, but also watch and learn from videos. And hopefully everything that we're putting forward is things that could be used no matter what your vehicle is or how you're transporting. As far as flights go, we have a whole manual that we give out to all of our source and destination shelters that they work with, and also our flight partner works through. But yeah, you're right. There's different point systems and those kind of things that happen with different flights. And then people like pilots and pods that have their own private plane, they also are going to have their own pieces that they have to follow. But if you Google transport best practices, there's all kinds of things out there at the moment. And if there's something in particular that you really would like a video of that you'd like to see, you can feel free to email and ask, and we can get the team working on making something as well. We're happy to do that.
I wanted to do a quick plug for the ASPCA Pros. They have excellent videos on, I know it seems simple, but disinfecting kennels in your transport van. It's not super simple, like when you go to practice it. So it was really helpful to have a guide on making sure all the nooks and crannies of kennels are being disinfected. So I really appreciate those videos. They're nice, short and sweet too. You don't have to watch like 30 minutes of it.
Thanks, Claire.
For the young people who want short, sweet videos. Oh, that's a nice note from Sarah. This year in the A transported out 38 dogs from us so we could relieve a neighboring community shelter of their population while they dealt with a water crisis, a side effect of burn scar flaying from the 2022 wildfires here in New Mexico. The project didn't net capacity gains, and we're still struggling with our population, but it did enable us to help our neighbors. We were so impressed by your team. Thank you. That's really awesome. Okay, as we're coming to the end of our time, I have one more question, and then I want to ask each of you sort of like what your words of advice are. But before then, I want to ask money. So I have not been in a time in animal sheltering where money feels so tight. I feel like there was so much more available grant funding. Just nationally, there was more pots of money to pull from, and now everybody's like, wait, where are the resources? Are these programs for sending or receiving shelters capable of generating like donations? And is that something orgs should think about?
One thing I was gonna talk about when we were talking about like visiting each other, but this is more related to this question. One group I wanted to shout out, One Tail at a Time in Portland. They did a great job of sending a whole team down to West Texas a couple years ago, and they I think it's a great example of, not everyone has a budget for that, for like sending 15 plus people on a plane for several days on a work trip in West Texas at the shelter there, but they were able to raise by bringing their community in and telling how important this trip was and what this meant. They were able to raise like $70,000, so not only enough to cover the trip for everyone, but extra. And that was just around giving their community and showing the community the impact of their innovation and all of their incredible programming I also thought it was great that during their annual fundraising gala, they invited their two partners from West Texas, like the shelter manager and the ACO, and they spoke. They put them on the stage, and I thought it was just really great collaboration. So I think giving insight into your programs, putting them in the passenger seat. I always like to say, it's so cheesy, but I saw it once. But I think that's really important. Taking videos, like, videos of your transport, giving people an inside look of all the logistics and what goes on behind the scenes, because people are really interested in it. A lot of people don't know that dogs and cats are traveling all over the state and all over the country. So giving them an inside look, I think, can really bring in some funds and a lot of support, not only in your community, but nationally as well.
Okay, so what is your life lesson learned from all these years of doing this, or advice for the audience?
I'll go. Oh, Karen, you go first. I just talked.
Go.
From a sending perspective, and I can't take credit for this because I learned this from one of my closest friends and colleagues that also works in rural West Texas, but she always says advocate from a place of strength. And I think that is one of the most powerful things that I've ever heard, because it can be, from a sending side, it can be very demoralizing and just suck your energy day in and day out when you feel like you're always begging for one more favor or one more dog, or apologizing if a transport doesn't go off completely with any issues. So I've personally held that over the years as feeling like I'm carrying the burden, and it is exhausting. And so I think talking to different shelters that are working in this space, when you're on the sending perspective, I know I'm not alone in feeling that. So I think understanding that it's not a one-sided operation, that it's not begging for a favor. We are providing a gift. We are completing homes with the dogs and cats that we're sending out. We are making people adopt versus going to breeders. We're allowing that to happen and seeing those stories and getting that feedback. So I think just understanding that we're not always begging for a favor, but advocating for our animals from a place of strength is something that I will carry with me. And I feel like it's such an important lesson for any sending organization out there. Just being really proud of the work that you're doing.
Thanks.
So I started out in transport as a source shelter, as a sending shelter. And so what I said back then in some video at some point was that what transport brings is hope. That when you're buried in population, there's animals everywhere, you're trying so hard to help everybody, and there's just no pop-off valve at all, that hope starts to fade. And I think that the destination shelters understanding that what they're bringing by helping and taking animals, even small numbers of animals, any numbers of animals, is that sources feel seen, and it brings them hope, and it changes the focus of what they're able to do, because they feel stronger. They feel more able to do other programs locally when they feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel and there's hope. And so what I've always tried to do in my present job and all the way through is remember what it felt like when the truck pulled up and when the animals left, and that we would cry because it was just amazing. And I still can't watch the plane take off without crying, and we do it all the time. But I really feel like hope is the key to this work.
Yeah, I think what Claire and Karen said is amazing. And it's really all about, to me, transport is all about relationships. And it's about the relationship that you have with the source shelter and with the folks that are helping you with the transport and with your own organization. And one of the things that we have always done within our organization is share a weekly compilation of adoption updates. And what I started doing last year, and I could shoot myself for not trying to do this earlier, is I go through and I figure out which shelter these animals came from, and I'm now sending those forward to the source shelters. And yeah, they've sent us a lot more animals that I get adoption updates on, and sometimes it's only one or two, but it helps strengthen that relationship, and it gives hope to the folks that are in the shelter, because they're not just sending the animal off and never hearing about it again. And so anything you can do, big or small, in the course of that relationship to really build that team mentality and realize that source and receiver, you're in this together to move this animal, to help the family that ultimately adopts. and to give meaning along the way to all the people that are part of the transport, because the pilots, the drivers, the volunteers that come and help prep, the volunteers that help unload, everyone is getting something from that transport. So really seeing the big picture and the relationships that go into that transport, I think is something that should
We have 1 minute left. Okay, so Mirah, were you done, or do you want to say?
No, I was done. I just think, the community is just incredible. And I'm really grateful to the Pedigree Foundation for bringing us all together. And I've said it a couple of times, but I meet people through transports, and those are relationships that last and build. And, it really has to be something that we're all working on together.
You guys are so inspiring. Thank you. It's like, I just feel like this whole thing we need to take and turn into some stuff, because you're so experienced in this area, and I think we have to keep hope alive for transport. So thank you so much. Thanks for everybody who attended, and everyone who will watch in the future this recording. Again, check out that Pedigree Foundation toolkit, and let us know if we can help you. We'll make sure you have our contact information if you're trying to start transport. Most of us we'll answer the phone if you need us. So thanks everyone, and thanks again to Deb and Meg at Pedigree Foundation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.